Tēnā koutou katoa, ni sambole vinaka, ngā lola soifua, malelange mama. My name is Ray Si'ilata, and I'm speaking to you from Tāmaki Makaurau, Auckland, Aotearoa, New Zealand. And the title of this presentation is Othering Monolingualism, the Pasifika Early Literacy Project. Ki te tāo tōku mātua, no Ngāti Raukawa no tū haurangi ahau. So on my father's side, I'm Māori. Ki te tāo tōku whaia, no Fiti, no savu ahau. On my mother's side from Fiji, and through my husband and children, I connect to other nations in the Pacific, Samoa, Tonga, Tuvalu, Tokelau. So I'd like to talk to you about linguistic diversity in Aotearoa, New Zealand, initially to set the scene for this project that I'm going to tell you a little bit about. And so Aotearoa, New Zealand is predominantly monolingual, with English as the dominant public language. Post-colonial New Zealand is founded on Te Tiriti o Waitangi, or the Treaty of Waitangi, a bicultural partnership or treaty that was signed between the Crown and tangata whenua or Māori, the indigenous people of Aotearoa, in 1840. New Zealand's education demographic is becoming increasingly diverse, with more than 160 ethnic minorities and community languages. And so you can see here from the what is often referred to as ESOL-funded students, English for speakers of other languages. So funding provided to schools to support learners who come with a language resource other than English. You can see that the highest funded ethnicities currently are Chinese, Indian, Samoan, Filipino, Tongan, and so on. So Pacific peoples actually in Aotearoa, the numbers are continuing to increase. So the 2018 census recorded 381,642 people from over 30 distinct Pacific groups living in Aotearoa. And the majority of them, approximately 64%, live in Tāmaki Makaurau, Auckland. So this is 85,000 people more than was recorded in 2013. And so you can see from this graphic here that the Auckland population of Pacific peoples is generally a lot higher than in other parts of the nation. So this project currently, the Pasifika Early Literacy Project, commonly referred to as PELP, has been operating in Tāmaki Makaurau in Auckland since 2014 with teachers of young Pacific learners or children, and since 2020 also working with teachers from English medium early childhood centres and Pacific medium early childhood centres. It uses the Ministry of Education's Pasifika or Pacific dual language books as windows into the lived experiences and worlds of Pacific children, and as catalysts to support utilisation of Pacific languages and our embodied literacies at home, at centre and at school, and focused on 5 Pacific languages: Cook Islands Māori, Niuean, Samoan, Tokelauan and Tongan. So this project really focuses on strengthening teacher capability to validate and utilise Pasifika tamariki children's languages, cultural resources and embodied experiences at home and at early learning centres and in schools. What we seek to do through the project is to normalise the utilisation of Pasifika linguistic and cultural resources as essential foundations of Pasifika second language acquisition, literacy learning, and tamariki learner success. And it also supports Pacific children to see themselves, their ways of being, and their funds of knowledge represented in the valued knowledges of schooling and of ECE. So here's a couple of examples: getting ready for school, both in Aotearoa, New Zealand, and in our island nations. So it really supports families to see themselves and children to see themselves and their valued funds of knowledge within the schema or underpinning or underlying messages of these books, and to see their own embodied languages and literacies represented in the valued literacy of schooling. So for us as Pacific people, we express this idea of heart language. And these are expressed through our embodied practices, through oratory, through memorization, through recitation, through proverbs, through song, through dance, through drama, through languaging, through all of our embodied practice, including our arts practice. So these are all part of our languaging and our literacies, our multi-literacies. And so these are the things that we are supporting teachers to incorporate into their practice with Pacific children. So when we first piloted this work, getting teachers to work bilingually or multilingually with their Pasifika children was not normalised practice in English medium classrooms. So we wanted to co-construct this with teachers so that they didn't get too defensive about it. Teachers generally are used to holding power in classrooms. So we had to support teachers to actually have choice and make decisions around how much they were able to put into practice. And we noticed that when they felt they had ownership of it, they were willing to have a go. And so what this meant was that teachers needed to be willing to be vulnerable and to be positioned as unknowing or as learners. And so here's a quote from one of those teachers. I didn't know how to be culturally responsive. I remember that first workshop feeling out of my comfort zone and thinking, how can I teach using bilingual books when I can't speak Tongan? How can I teach in Tongan or Samoan? I remember that fear. But she soon realised in just creating opportunities in her classroom for the children to become the teacher, she found this, that you don't need to be fluent in the language. You can let the children be the experts. They just step up and shine, and it transforms your classroom culture. The children love it. It strengthens their literacy in English too, because of the way you're working with the dual language books. So as teachers continue to engage in their professional learning and then to take risks around trying out these practices within their classrooms, to move from monolingual to multilingual spaces or bilingual spaces, to be willing to make themselves vulnerable, they began to then surface and recognise their own existing beliefs. And this comes from one of those teachers. The bottom line is, I failed this child and I have changed. And I'm really emotional about this because if I failed him, how many other children have I failed? And I've noticed that every single one of my children are now moving. And this has all taken part in the last month or so. It's happened. Often we think we know it all. Actually, we don't. I used to think I was a damn good teacher, and you woke me up on that day. I had to have a really good check of myself and my teaching practices and what was working and what wasn't and how I could change it. And to this day, it's affected me greatly. So as teachers became willing to share power, then they started to learn from Pasifika children. So Pasifika children were no longer othered in their classrooms, but in fact became the teachers, both of other children and of the teacher. So this teacher said, they're constantly translating for me, but also they're talking to each other in their heritage language. They love seeing me being the learner. They're at the point now where they will slow their speech down for me so I can repeat new words, and they are the experts, and they are so proud. The change in classroom culture is mind-blowing. It's a culture of talk and expressing themselves, of being proud of who you are and your language and your country, and accepting of everybody else's language and culture. So teachers actually realised as they changed their practice and began to support children to make connections between their lived experiences and the schema in the book, or the story of the book, or the underpinning message in the book, that they realised they had a real lack of knowledge about children's linguistic and cultural resources at home. I can't read the books to them, but the book speaks to their worldview. These are their stories. Quite often our books do not intersect with children's worldviews, like skiing holidays and feeding baby lambs on the farm. I hadn't thought about the stories that children bring with them to school. They all have stories that they bring. So here's an example from a year 1-2 teacher who provided an opportunity for her children to plant talo, a root crop in the Pacific. So here's the book that they based this work around, the story of Tono's talo garden. And so the children went through this whole language experience process where they narrated the steps in Lea Whakatonga or Tongan language and in English. And so children were provided opportunities to draw fully on their linguistic and cultural resources at school as a result of the teacher being willing to share power.
If you don't know what it means here, I will tell you. Faileni is cutting the barrel. Okukeli a esela I luo. If you don't know what that means here, I will tell you again. I am digging a hole. Okutuku kiloto aitalo a eseta keluo. If you don't know what that means here, I will tell you. And Santa is putting the talo inside the hole. When I lose. If you don't know what that means, yeah, I'll tell you. Owen is
So the classic line from that child, if you don't know what that means, here, I will tell you. It provides a powerful example of how linguistic resources are intertwined with cultural identities and children's agency as learners. This approach invites children to draw on their full linguistic repertoires, positioning them as language experts who support monolingual teachers learning in English medium contexts, thus othering monolingualism. It creates opportunities for regenerating and recasting existing knowledge encoded in the language of the heart that validates cultural well-being for children and their families. So, the EFA question asks, how do people of conflicting worldviews, memories, and future visions encounter each other? For us in English medium education in Aotearoa, New Zealand, it's crucial to provide dominant culture teachers with opportunities to unpack their preconceived notions of the diversities of Pacific ways of knowing and being. In this sense, encountering the other entails teachers seeing themselves as other. When teachers see themselves through the eyes of children and families whose linguistic and cultural resources are different to those valued in educational settings, deficit assumptions are surfaced and disrupted, and transformational change begins to occur. In the Pasifika Early Literacy Project, we normalise bilingual and multilingual language and literacy practices, positioning monolingualism as other. Through this approach, the linguistic resources and embodied cultural literacies of Pacific children, families, and teachers are positioned as central to notions of success. Encountering the other in multilingual, multicultural contexts entails the teacher understanding how the child and the child's family might encounter the teacher as other. Kia ora koutou. Thank you for listening.